Hello and welcome to Unstress. My name is Dr. Ron Ehrlich. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I am recording this podcast, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'm paying my respects because I believe we have so much to learn from our First Nations people, particularly about connection and respect. Well, we've had a few episodes which have explored insomnia. We've spoken to sleep psychologist Rosemary Clancy. We've spoken again to sleep physician from Colorado in the US, Dave McCarty. But today we are going to be exploring insomnia from a different perspective. And we're talking to Dr. Shankardev Saraswati. Now, Shankardev has been on the podcast several times. He's a member of the advisory board for Unstress Health, and he's a good friend. He's a integrative doctor, general practitioner who specializes in psychotherapy and has for almost 50 years been teaching yoga and meditation. His site, his program, Big Shakti, is a great site if you are wanting to access meditation courses and learn from a real expert in this field. Now, today we're going to be talking about non-sleep deep rest, and you'll hear what that's all about. And as I've said many times, and I say in the introduction to every one of my podcasts, where I pay my respects to the original custodians of the land on which I am recording this podcast. The reason I do that is because I really believe we have so much to learn from the past. Lessons from the past is something we really need to focus on because those lessons have stood the test of time, and they come from wisdom and experience and common sense and a sense of connection and respect for not just the wholeness of the human body, but our connection to the land in which we live and the whole respect for the planet. So anyway, I got a bit distracted there, but it's interesting to hear that non-sleep deep rest is a real thing. I mean, rest is important. And guess what? Yoga Nidra has been a technique that's been used for thousands of years. And it looks remarkably similar to and sounds remarkably similar to non-sleep deep rest, which may be a wonderful tool to use if you suffer from insomnia, or even if you don't, you're having some restless night's sleep. So I hope you enjoy this conversation I had with Dr. Shankardev Saraswati. Welcome back, Shankardev.
Thanks, Ron. Good to be here.
Shankardev, we've been talking in recent weeks about insomnia, and we've been talking to psychologists and sleep physicians. And the advice is generally, if you're not sleeping, well, if you have insomnia and it's taking you a long time to get to sleep, after 20 minutes, get up, move around and start again, if you like. And that's never sat well with me. And then I discovered this non-sleep deep rest thing, which is real and powerful, and it sounded suspiciously like Yoga Nidra, which I know you have been talking about for many, many years. Tell us about Yoga Nidra. Tell us about what it is and how it can fit in.
Sure. Well, Yoga Nidra is a relaxation meditation, and in fact, the term Yoga Nidra is a complex term because it has multiple levels of meaning, as do a lot of these things in the yogic and Sanskritic traditions. In its original sense, Yoga Nidra meant the dissolution of the entire universe when God went to sleep. That was his Yoga Nidra.
Okay.
It was a him.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's not go down that path at the moment. That's the subject of another podcast.
That's right. But that's an ancient philosophical ground from which the word Yoga Nidra arose. And the reason that it's important is that there's a lot of confusion about how long Yoga Nidra as a technique has been around versus as a philosophical concept. Mm-hmm. And so basically, what happened was that in about the 60s, 50s and 60s, Swami Satyananda from the Bihar School of Yoga developed a technique called Yoga Nidra, which he derived from ancient yogic texts that enabled us to take control of the body and the mind through lying down and directing our attention systematically to various parts of the body and the breath and to the mind, and to induce a state of deep, deep relaxation. Very simple, very effective, became incredibly popular. And nowadays, it is probably one of the most useful and ubiquitous of all the meditation techniques around. And many other schools adopted the methodology, which is a relaxation-based technique. And there's been a lot of different relaxation techniques which have worked with the body and the breath and so on. And they've adapted it and called it their own form of Yoga Nidra. So there are many forms of Yoga Nidra out there. And, you know, each school has its own way of understanding and developing it. And so there are different systems. There are different ways of doing it. The most popular method that I know of is the one from Swami Satyananda. And it originally is a technique that was designed to take your awareness into a state of conscious sleeping. The word yoga means, in this instance, because the word yoga has multiple levels of meaning, any form of connection is a yoga. But here, it's conscious connection with the sleeping state. So what it meant was that you could go inward in a meditative state while you're lying and explore what would happen to you consciously as your body progressively moved towards the sleep state. And then for very advanced yogis, they could stay awake even when they were in a very deep state of physical sleep, in a delta brainwave state, which indicated deep sleep, but they were able to consciously remain aware of what was happening externally and internally at the same time. It has been adapted now, and it has two main forms. The first is therapeutic, that is stress reduction and the removal of the negative effects of stress and the incorporation of the positive effects of stress, allowing you to take stress into your body and manage it well, digest it, basically. And as a powerful, deep meditation state that allows us to explore very deep states of consciousness. And that really is something that most people living a normal life can't do because we're so tired, we're so exhausted by the various forces, of responsibility, the world, state of the economy, viruses, and so on. We're stressed. And so Yoga Nidra becomes a very powerful method of recuperation. Deep rest, so relax, rest, recuperate, recharge, and rejuvenate. They're the 5 R's that I think of the therapeutic.
Say it again.
Yeah. Relax.
Yep.
Rest.
Yep.
Recharge, rejuvenate. Yeah, rejuvenate. I can't remember now exactly.
That's okay. That's okay. But listen,
it popped out at the moment.
That's right. But what's so interesting about this is because, we get told, and I've passed this message on many times, that sleep's the most important part of the day, in the sense of doing all those things, recharging, rebooting, rebuilding. Is that can we throw another R in there? Rebuilding. Let's do rebuilding.
Did you say rebooting?
Rebooting. I did say rebooting.
I love the reboot. I love the reboot.
Well, the mind sometimes, that's what sleep's doing. It's kind of rebooting and sorting out our memories from the day, what's worth keeping, what's not, processing emotions, etc., etc.
Yeah, sure.
But when you think of sleep as being the most important part of the day and you're not sleeping, and you're looking and we're not sleeping and oh God, this is really important. And yet here I am not sleeping. Oh God, I'm getting stressed. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing. And I know sleep psychologist Rosemary Clancy said, once the prefrontal cortex gets involved in sleep, forget it. You're not going to sleep. But here's where Yoga Nidra can bring that into play in a positive way, isn't it?
That's right. Absolutely. So sleep is definitely one of the most important arms or legs of the four-legged stool, or the five these unstressing principles that we need to remember because and cultivate sleep. And the thing is, there's insomnia, there's extreme insomnia in which people feel they haven't slept at all, and then there's just ineffective sleep, inefficient sleeping, or the sleep architecture becomes chaotic. And that can be because of all the other factors of stress, food, alcohol, and so on. So these all play a role, and they all have to be addressed. And so sleep hygiene is an important part of it. And for some people who are cognitively inflamed, in a sense, that their thinking process and their anxieties are so strong, then the various orthodoxies around insomnia have a value. But I think, as you rightly say, here's another addition to the armamentum that we can use. And what happens in Yoga Nidra is the technique is described like this. You progressively move from what's called a grosser state of consciousness, physical consciousness, to subtler states of physicality, physical awareness. So you move into, you work through the body, you go to the breath, you go to the mind. And then if you can go deeper, you can go into your psyche. And then in the yogis would say you can touch your soul with it, because that's the ultimate aim of this practice. But in insomnia, what happens is that the thinking, when the frontal cortex becomes autonomous and out of our control, so that we wake up with a thought, and we know the moment that thought occurs, it triggers usually an adrenaline or a cortisol stress response. We know that the body is then triggered into wakefulness. That's it reduces the melatonin, interferes with the melatonin cortisol cycles, and we all know how difficult it is. It takes time then to reset and go back. And this is where Yoga Nidra works, especially the 5 stages of Yoga Nidra. The first 2 stages are particularly important. And I'm talking about the Satyananda Yoga Nidra tradition that I was trained in. The first 2 stages of that are very important. The first is body rotation, which is common to most forms of Yoga Nidra, in which you go through a part of the body. It's common to most relaxation techniques. You name a part of the body, you go systematically from part to part, moving through the right hand, up through the shoulder, down the right side, then to the left hand, up to the left shoulder, down to the left side, to the feet, up the back and down the front. And you touch the various parts of your body. And what that does, we believe, is it triggers the cortex, the sensory motor cortex, and moves sort of along the homunculus, what's called it triggers various pathways along the cortex. And so it takes the brain away from the thinking frontal aspect to a more sensory aspect. And that sensory aspect's the key. So one of the great tricks that I often teach my patients is to feel the whole back pressing against the bed and how good that feels. So that's a slight hypnotic suggestion, but it works because it's true. If your back is pressing, you can allow yourself to relax down and feel that you can really let go into the physicality of the moment. Then you get out of the thinking. You ground yourself back in the body, you're out of the thinking. So that kind of movement entrains the awareness away from being fixed into a kind of obsessive thinking, rumination, and takes it back into a more sensory motor aspect. And then you go into the breath. And the breath, of course, if you...
Well, hang on, Shankardev.
Yeah, sure.
We're in stage 1 of body scanning, more or less, isn't it?
Body scanning, that's right.
Body scanning. So that's stage 1. Yeah,
that's
just
right.
literally working our way through the body, from head to toe, and being aware of your presence in the bed as you interact with the bed.
That's
the sensation on the back of your legs and the back, the sheets, the whole experience. That's stage 1. So go on. Now, stage 2.
Before we go to stage 2, Ron, I'll just say that with all of these techniques, these are meditation techniques, that the more you practice them, if you did it on a daily basis while you went to bed, for example, at the moment, it's part of your sleep hygiene, you lie down and you go through your body rotation, that in itself starts to form a habit, a good kind of habit, and it creates its own neurological patterns and positive virtuous signaling, in terms of upregulating relaxation in the body, so that it becomes more accessible when you need it. And that's the problem with all of these things. They're not pills. The pills, you take them, they take over. You surrender yourself to the drug. But with these sorts of techniques, the great advantage of this is that the more you practice this kind of body rotation in particular, you set up kind of a doorway, an access into another part of your brain that's being cultivated, strengthened, it's exercised. Like anything, that has a great advantage. And then once you've done that, as we said, you said stage 2 is breathing. And the breath work generally involves following the breath in the nostrils or in the belly and becoming aware of the rhythm of the breath, so that each breath in, you want to slow it down consciously, take control, and each breath out, you want to consciously let go and feel that you're letting go. And we know that of all the autonomic nervous system functions, respiration is the only autonomic system function that has dual control. It has both autonomic and it has conscious voluntary control. So it usually goes on by itself, which is great. So you have to think about it. But when you want to, you can use it. And you can use the breath to regulate every other system in your body, which is why in the yogi traditions, breathing techniques called pranayama are so important. And the use of the breath is so important. And prana, of course, in those traditions is thought of as life force, as vital energy. And the cultivation of that is a great thing in these traditions. So definitely what you would do in this technique, let's start with that, is you might follow the breath rising in the 2 nostrils. You can there's lots of different patterns you can create, but generally speaking, you don't want to be doing too much effort, making too much effort or trying to breathe with too much control. You simply want to influence the breath, let's say, so that it slows down and it starts to initiate a more parasympathetic dominant tone, and that then reduces the cortisol adrenaline sympathetic axis, and you move back towards sleep. Of course, it all depends on what's going on in your life at the same time, because, having said this, for some people, they've got good reason to worry, and sometimes being up at night, you can be creative as well. So getting out of bed and going out and being creative is good. But for the majority of people, sleep is just generally, they haven't processed the stresses of the day. And so these are things that we can do to what we call, let's say, become self-aware, number one, self-aware of our own structure, what's going on, and then induce self-regulation. And self-regulation is the key, conscious self-regulation. So voluntary control. And what they used to say about yoga was mind over matter. That's probably true.
I mean, breathing is, about 10 or 15 years ago, I learned late in my career, but I learned that you could switch on the parasympathetic, rest and digest within a minute or two, or within a few breaths, by taking a slow breath in through the nose for 3 or 4 seconds, going out through the nose or mouth for 3 or 4 seconds and holding the breath for a few seconds, and repeat that 5 times, and bang, you've switched on the rest and digest. And what a great time to do that, just as you're lying in bed, and also probably just before you eat something is probably a good time as well. And guess what? There's a whole, and here you are talking about pranayama, which has been around for a long, long time. But like non-sleep deep rest, aka yoga nidra, resonance frequency breathing is a modern term for pranayama and switching on the parasympathetic. This is why I love it, because we've got so much to learn from lessons from the past. Go on. Stage 2 is breathing. Let's go. What's the 5 stages you mentioned?
Yeah, stage 3 is the development of the mind. So it would be For example, there's so many different ways of doing it. So you could work on sensations. So what happens is with sleep, the reason that sleep's so important is that what we're doing is we're reducing the sensory load on the brain. That's the key. So sensory input is reduced. And meditation is the same. Meditation is about reduction of sensory input so that you become aware, you stay, whereas in sleep, you want to become unconscious and allow your body to just do what it wants to do. In meditation, you want to participate in an internal process just through awareness. Again, self-awareness is the key. And then you learn these techniques of self-regulation. So stage 3 is generally about working with feeling states. So it could be inducing a feeling of heat in the body or cold in the body or pain. You could remember certain painful stimuluses or pleasurable stimulus. You learn to create feeling states. And that way you feel in control, because one of the problems, or one of the things that most people are afraid of is unpleasant feelings, unpleasant emotions, unpleasant thoughts. And that gives those thoughts and feelings a lot of power. So by learning to create and destroy a feeling, create a sense of, remember what it felt like to lie on the beach in the middle of the day in the hot sun, and you can feel, the sand is below you and the heat of the sun is on top of you. It's penetrating your skin. You can feel that heat, and you just feel that, you imagine that, and then you switch and it's become very cold and you're lying on ice and it's very, very cold. So it's a kind of hypnotic process but it's a self-hypnosis. Or you're heavy, incredibly heavy. So your arms are so heavy you can't move them. They feel like lead pipes. Or you feel like you're lying on feathers. You're so light, you actually begin to float off. So you're creating, you're using the internal potential of your own imagination to create positive, negative, anything. It doesn't matter. You're free. And of course, once you can do that, you have a sense of confidence. There are other so stages 3, 4 would be the visualization of various objects and symbols, because when you move into so in stage 3, what you're doing is you're working with sensations, but internalized sensations, because they've got nothing to do with the external. There's nothing going on externally. You're not in any danger. You're just experiencing a sensation that you've self-created. Then you move to a deeper part of the mind, which is a symbolic, mythic, archetypal level. And that level, you would take symbols, very symbols. And often a teacher will construct, for more advanced students in particular, we're not talking about insomnia here so much, but for more advanced students, various symbols that would support them to access deep, mythic, symbolic parts of themselves. It could be very primitive, because the psyche, we're talking about the psyche here, the psyche has 2 polarities, basically the animal instinctive, part of the psyche, and the more spiritual part of the psyche, the higher and the lower elements. And so you might help people to access any of those, the instinctive, the power of instinct, the power of the various drivers that, that drive humanity, power, sex, money. Or you might take them into animal symbols, in which you try to experience the power of that animal, a cobra, an elephant, an ant, a deer, a gazelle, or a koala bear, or a kangaroo, depending where you are.
Yeah.
And then, or you take them into spiritual symbolism, such as, the sun, luminous symbols, and so on. Those luminous symbols have more uplifting and kind of they direct the consciousness to enlightening parts of us, let's say. And the fifth stage is an ultimate stage, which very few people ever reach, which is what's called the totally awakened state. And in that state, you are totally conscious. You remain self-aware under all conditions. So you never lose your awareness of self. Even when your body's asleep, you're totally present. So that's what they would say is real enlightenment, the total, self-realization, and an ultimate state of meditative accomplishment. Takes a little bit of practice.
Yeah, but what a journey to go, and what a structure to have to play with. I mean, this is, as you say, exercising it is the key, getting better at it. But even those first two stages, as actually 3 and 4 are pretty powerful parts too.
That's right.
For us to, as we're lying there in bed, stressed by the fact that we're not sleeping and preoccupied by whatever has happened. And as you say, it's often entirely appropriate that we do that. But I think when we talk about insomnia, it's something that has become ingrained for more than 3 months of at least 3 nights a week. I think it's defined as.
Yes, right. Yeah.
That you're doing this. Well, you need to start forming new habits, and this is what I love about this particular approach, that it gives you so many tools in that toolbox to play around with.
Absolutely. And so stage 1 alone is enough for a lot of people.
Yeah.
That'll do it. That will do it. Because you're really getting into the brain, the sensory motor cortex. And I think, in my experience, most people fall asleep well before they finish the complete process. That most people.
Well, non-sleep deep rest. What do you think of that, and how is that different from Yoga Nidra?
Well, I think what they've done, Hellerman, isn't it? What's the name of that guy?
I'm not sure of I've heard of Huberman. Yeah, he's terrific. Andrew Huberman from Stanford.
Well, he said in his podcast that he doesn't like the word Yoga Nidra.
Yes, I'm sure he doesn't.
It's confusing, Fucking hell. Don't beat me out on that one.
No, I know. See, I think that is actually so interesting, isn't it? Like, this is part of what is the problem. People come up with an idea and they want to own it. And when they find out that, and I think Andrew Huberman is fantastic, I have to say. I mean, it's very often his programs are very intense. I know I've been drinking a lot less alcohol since he did that whole thing on alcohol. But this is an interesting one, because non-sleep deep rest, if that's his thing, and he finds out, hey, hang on, this is something they've been talked about for thousands of years. Maybe I'm not as special as I thought I was. Whereas I think he is, because he puts a neuroscientific perspective on it.
Look, it's what happened to all of yoga in the West.
Yeah,
it got planted in the soil of the West. These ideas and concepts and techniques, and they got reduced. They were cannibalized, and because of our, as you say, look, the human foibles, frailties, whatever it is, the quirks of humanity, the ego. We want to make it our own, special, American, Australian, whatever, and so we lose access. Not everyone, of course, because it's out there, but. And the good thing is that it makes access to a lot of more people.
Yeah.
The negative thing is that, you're only getting you're not getting the capacity, the deep rest. You're getting the rest component, but you're not getting all those other levels of movement from state to state.
Yes.
You see, which is potential, which strengthens. So instead of just having a tool that's a Band-Aid, you could have a tool that's promoting more and more power in the individual, a greater control, a greater sense of what we're capable of. Yeah. I mean, that's the great value of it,
Yeah, and I think
it's not just therapy. Yeah,
and again, I think this kind of lessons from the past, and I do this acknowledgement to country at the beginning of every podcast, and I do it because I feel we have so much to learn from our past, and in particular about connection and respect.
Yeah.
And I know you've said this many times, that yoga and meditation are another words for connection. But
Yeah.
First Nations people or traditional cultures have they've embedded those two concepts of connection and respect into every aspect of life.
Without it, you don't survive. The other thing to say about Yoga Nidra is that it has application as a restorative function. So if you didn't sleep well and you woke up in the morning and you were tired, you could put on a Yoga Nidra recording, find one that you like, and within 20, 30 minutes, you'll feel that you've had the equivalent of several hours sleep. You'll feel restored. We know that napping, conscious napping, as long as it's not more than, an hour or so, and you're not going into these deep states of sleep, you're going to the more superficial level, are very helpful in restoring function. In some ways, of course, you want to be careful about. The problem is that if you do drift into deep sleep, then you knock yourself out of balance. So you have to use a recording, and you have to use half an hour, 20 minutes or 30 minutes is the right amount.
Yeah.
And that will give you, like that rest, deep rest. You'll restore your nervous system back, and you'll accumulate rest, basically, versus accumulating stress and tension. So you can do that in the morning. You can do that. In the afternoon. I don't recommend that people do a complete Yoga Nidra practice before sleep, because they'll usually wake up refreshed. So
from the Yoga Nidra.
From the Yoga Nidra, often. It's not for everyone. It's different. You see, it's a very individualized process. These are not standardized pills, so we do need to be aware of, how self-awareness is the foundation. How's it affecting me? What do I need? What's working for me? But I think stage 1 and stage 2 is not a complete Yoga Nidra generally, and you would do that without a recording. Best thing is you would have, or a very short recording that gets you in. Like, for example, on our website, we do have 2 Yoga Nidras and a relaxation meditation program. And in the relaxation meditation program called 3 Easy Steps, we have a short Yoga Nidra attached to that. We have 2 Yoga Nidras. One is a beginner's Yoga Nidra, only body and breath. And then we have a more advanced Yoga Nidra on the chakras. And we're going to build more of those, because, we're going to create more therapeutically applied practices. But I think that once you get the idea of it, once you understand what you're doing, you're better off not using a recording. But generally speaking, for the practice, most people need a recording. Otherwise, they will fall deeply asleep, and their brains are not programmed yet to wake up at 20 or 30 minutes. Often, they'll keep sleeping on if they don't have a recording.
Yeah, well, that particular introductory 3-way thing, I know, is a CD that we've had in our surgery at the Sydney Holistic Dental Centre for the last, I think, 25 or 30 years, actually, since we've known each other. And right. It's still very, very popular amongst our patients. It's just so accessible. So I guess the message is it's a powerful tool to use during the day or on waking if you haven't slept well. But if you're lying there in bed and you're not sleeping, or if you're suffering from insomnia, it's a tool to use as a way of engaging with that.
That's right. And so what you would do before you do the getting up type of routine, wandering around, making yourself tired again. Some people like to have a shower or, relax their bodies and stretch and then go back to bed. But before you do that, you might just lie down, recognize the brain is overtaxed, overactive, come into the physicality of the body, rotate the awareness around from point to point. So you work you learn a routine. For us, I always start with the right-hand thumb, then the first finger, second finger, third finger, little finger, palm, wrist, elbow, shoulder, side, waist, hip, thigh, knee, calf, ankle, big toe, little toe, so the toes. Left hand thumb, first, second, third, fourth fingers, palm, wrist, elbow. Go up and then down the left side. You touch each part with your awareness. So the awareness, when consciousness makes contact with a part of the body, then the brain, it's feeling that part. Then that has that's a neurological stimulus. So it goes down through the hips and knees, calves, and so on, back to the toes, and then up the back. So you say right buttock, right shoulder, left. I mean, it's a process, and then so you really have to. You've got to start to pull the awareness away from the gravity of worry and anxiety and rumination. I'm not going to sleep, blah, 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 some sort of catastrophic hypnotic process that you're going to create more and more stress for yourself by your thinking. You pull yourself out of that and you go through a ritual. These are rituals, and these rituals have a form, and the forms are designed to take you into certain states, away from stress into relaxation. So you do that at night. Just give it a go. See what happens.
Beautiful.
But don't give up. Don't give up if you can't do it properly the first time. Takes a bit of practice.
Yes. Well, listen, thank you, because this is just, as soon as I read about it and heard about it, the next thing was I contacted you and said, we've just got to talk about this, and we'll have links to your website for that Yoga Nidra. Thanks. Because it's something that I know we've used for all of that time. And I think it's one of the reasons why, when I'm not sleeping well, and then, it happens to us all. Rather than stress out about it, I just think, okay. And when I heard Rosemary Clancy say, once the prefrontal cortex kicks in, your sleep is done. So this is just providing me with an alternate thing. Yeah, Shankardev, thank you so much today for joining us, as always.
Pleasure, Ron. Oh, it's a great pleasure.
So there it is. I always love talking to Shankardev. It's why I always get him. I learn so much whenever I talk to him. As I mentioned, he's on the advisory panel of our Unstress health platform and community. And it's really, I'm looking forward in the new year to maybe even doing some live workshops with him together for our Unstress health community. But Yoga Nidra, and it's such a simple and powerful tool. And that's really what Unstress Health is all about. Creating, just gathering together people and things and information which is easy, accessible, cheap, profound. It's at your fingertips. As I've said before, as the world we live in becomes increasingly more complicated, I truly believe the solutions to better health are remarkably simple. And what can be more simple and accessible than body scanning and controlling your breath, as we've talked about on so many other podcasts. It's why we at Unstress Health believe sleep and breathe are absolutely the foundational pillars. And once you get them right, you will have the physical, mental, and emotional energy and resilience to make all the right decisions about what you're going to eat, how you're going to move, and be able to control how you think. And Yoga Nidra and those 5 stages. And it is so interesting to see these new ideas of non-sleep, deep rest will become, if you haven't heard of it, you will. It will become more popular, but it's been around for thousands of years in Yoga Nidra. And at least since the 50s and 60s with Swami Shankardev Saraswati, who is intimately connected and has influenced Dr. Shankardev Saraswati. When I first met Shankardev 25 or 30 years ago, he was Swami Dr. Shankardev Saraswati. And as I said, he's been teaching yoga and meditation for almost 50 years. And I've known Shankardev for 30 years. We've had his CDs. So get on that Big Shakti website and download that Yoga Nidra and start putting it in, including it in your toolbox of things to do. And on those nights when you're not sleeping well, and remember what Rosemary Clancy said, once your prefrontal cortex kicks in, and hey, it does for all of us, we ruminate over the day's events and stresses, and that's normal. But if it's happening night after night after night and you want to regain control, then hey, body rotations, breathing, internal sensations by focusing on hot, cold, heavy, feathers, pain, and then visualization of objects, symbols that are spiritual, or getting into the animal instinctive side of things, and then achieving eventually a total awakening. What a wonderful tool to have. We'll have links to that, of course, on our show notes. I hope this finds you well. Until next time, this is Dr. Ron Ehrlich. Be well. This podcast provides general information and discussion about medicine, health, and related subjects. The content is not intended and should not be construed as medical advice or as a substitute for care by a qualified medical practitioner. If you or any other person has a medical concern, he or she should consult with an appropriately qualified medical practitioner. Guests who speak in this podcast express their own opinions, experiences, and conclusions.